Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I'm your co host, Jared Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose. Hello, everyone.
Welcome back to the September News Roundup, one of the most exciting news roundups of the year. You have just come back from a gauntlet in Monte Carlo, doing how many interviews on our small Supercede yacht?
I think we lost count. I think around 18, 19, 20, something like that. Got very, very warm by the end, but it was made up for by the incredible insights of our many, many special guests.
And it was a single take, it was a single sort of session. It was a tour de force of reinsurance podcasting. So our hats are off to you for that. Um, but it wasn't just Monte Carlo. There's news, unless there's Monte Carlo news you want to highlight, but we'll touch on loads of things in a very busy sort of news update now as things begin to come out in advance of the forthcoming 1/1s, which is kind of the reason Monte Carlo exists, right? The rendezvous is this kickoff of what is happening, what is the news as we approach the 1/1 renewal season.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to know about the Monte Carlo news, just look out for our mini clips, our mini episodes where we spoke directly to various participants, cedants, brokers, reinsurers, service providers, all sorts of experts across their fields, talking all about why people were at Monte Carlo, what they were looking for, what people were talking about, even how many years, how many decades they've been going. So really, really interesting sessions that are well worth a listen. So we'll let you get your Monte Carlo insights from there and crack on with the news more towards the end of September, I think.
Indeed, onwards then. So starting off the news for this month, there's a report that's come out from the Howden Tiger folks using some of their Nova insights, which again, we've talked to David and Michelle on our podcast. But what that report has essentially pulled out is cedents are looking at a 10% increase in their retained Nat Cat losses so far in 2023. And this is very much a signal of the difficulties in a hard market, right? Cedents are left either having to retain more and buy further up the tower, or spend a lot more on those reinsurance purchases. But a 10% increase in Nat Cat exposure isn't insignificant.
Yeah, there's a couple of things coming off the back of this as well. I think all of us sort of expect that type of thing to impact cedents in the US in particular, but we've seen it pretty much everywhere. So in the UK as well, we saw Moody's sort of summarizing their views as quite negative for P&C cedents struggling to get the cover they need in the face of inflation, rising reinsurance costs, lack of available ag cover, etc., meaning that everyone's feeling the pain at the moment. And I think one session that's worth checking out from our Monte Carlo Yacht podcast is the one with Paul Mang, where we talked a little about how this is potentially going to change the way cedents need to think about their own books, as well as they almost take on some of the portfolio management responsibilities that would have been picked up sooner by their reinsurers as those retentions rise, as they're retaining more of the catastrophic risk. They might need to think a bit differently about how they manage their portfolios and how they understand their data.
Yeah, and you're seeing off the back of that the other side of that coin, right? The impact on the reinsurers. In this case, slightly positive. It's looking like the more pure prop cat reinsurance you write, the greater your opportunity is to sort of regain your cost of capital and return value to shareholders and things. So there's always a bit of a trade-off here, but certainly from the lens of the cedents, it's a very complex space to be in. Shifting then gears ever so slightly to the reinsurers themselves, the reports look like the retro market going into 1/1 is expected to be hard, but at least stable. And if we sort of circle back to our 1/1 last year, the reason it was so volatile and it was so stressful for many was the retro market was really in flux. There was a lot of uncertainty around capacity that would be available. And as the retro deals got done from our retro friends, sort of New Year's Eve, it really was introducing a sort of a blockage into the entire reinsurance chain as the liquidity was sort of blocked at the front.
Yeah, I think we've seen a few things come off the back of this. On one hand, a slightly more stable and eager retro market this year, especially with few meaningful hurricane events so far in the hurricane season. But also, we've seen a buoyancy in the the alternative risk space as well. So a lot of cat bonds stepping into the space where retro was maybe missing last year. So we're seeing a bit of a boom there. It'll be maybe a little bit of competition. I think perhaps cat bonds are being seen as more of a normal part of a portfolio nowadays. That was a lot of the talk from Monte Carlo, but at the same time, it does feel like retro and alternative products are coming into competition with each other. One extra piece that I saw in the news relating to this that was very interesting was over at Lloyd's, they have this LCM5 set of catastrophes that they look at for sort of peak exposure and peak perils that could affect the Lloyd's market and the syndicates there. Patrick Tiernan came out a week or two ago basically to say 5 might not be enough, which is super interesting with all the secondary perils, with all of the losses that we've seen coming through from things which aren't your typical big, hurricane coming through and hitting the Floridian coast or similar. They started to think maybe we need to have an LCM6 or an LCM7. And historically, the LCM has really made syndicates and managing agents have to look at buying more reinsurance. So I can't really envisage a scenario by which this doesn't increase demand from the Lloyd's market for reinsurance and for retro capacity if that goes ahead. So we will see perhaps even more demand chasing a still pretty constrained amount of supply.
Yeah. And that's certainly an example of, in many ways, like forced demand, cedents that might not have been encouraged or wanting to go out into the market to make some of those purchases, now having their hand forced a little bit by Lloyd's. And the LCM historically has had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the MGAs and the syndicates there, but it makes complete sense. And you look at the evolution of these exposures and these perils, 5 seems like we're missing some very key ones as we evolve. Shifting then to the technology side, the news has now come out that Tremor has been acquired by W.R. Berkley. Berkley was an early investor in them, and from our understanding, one of the larger users of that platform. It seems to be more of an asset sale, something that Berkley's taking that technology now in-house. Whether they continue to utilize that software to purchase parts of their reinsurance, or they wind it up into something else internally is to be determined still, but it's looking like a bit of a shift as that product in the market sort of is taken out in many ways.
Indeed. And just actually, because I've always wanted to say this just in, because an email landed with my latest reinsurance news update as we were recording. In further support of what we were discussing about these secondary perils, Gallagher's reported that US severe convective storm insured losses hit 50 billion this year, which is the first time the peril has ever caused that level of loss for the industry. So yeah, really serious sort of stuff coming from outside the normal cohort of perils. So exciting times.
That is the most breaking story we've ever had on the reinsurance news roundup. But yeah, that's, when we look at the impact of these storms and the impact climate change is having on both the frequency and severity, classes of events, perils that have always been impactful and significant, hitting new levels is never a good sign for the industry, for profitability and those things, but something that we'll certainly track in advance of 1/1. One more story to wrap us up on the September news, and it wouldn't be a news update in the reinsurance world without at least an update on the continuing Vesttoo saga. We now have the reports that Aon, via its White Rock facility, is suing Vesttoo, and there's a bunch of back and forth around sell vehicles and the ownership rights of those. But more importantly now is the 2 co-founders and 2 more executives are being personally sued for their role in implicating fraud for up to $200 million. So any personal wealth or assets gained during the growth and meteoric rise of the startup seem to be gone now. I mean, if you gain your money through fraud, I guess that's probably the way it's going to play out at some point. But I'm really hoping someone writes a book on this. If Gagan is listening to the podcast, please, sir, write the book on the Vesttoo saga, because it's been a fascinating one to watch this play out over the last few months.
It's like you're what's your medical one? That's very similar. The
Oh, Bad Blood. If you are interested in
yeah,
these types of things, Bad Blood and the saga of Theranos and that sort of also fraudulent rise to multi-billion valuation before imminent collapse. Brilliant read. So
no,
we need a reinsurance version of it. I saw in one of the articles they were talking about the impact this will have on Bermuda regulation and things, and
mm,
because there's the Bermudan entity that Vestu set up, and it was by far the largest fraud ever committed on in the Bermudan insurance or reinsurance sector and things. So yeah, certainly
yeah.
a shocking one, and I don't think one will have a clear conclusion to before the end of this year. So continue to wait for the next news roundup and to get the most on up to date news on that.
Indeed. I think it was one of those topics that came up quite a bit at Monte Carlo, but in a
Mm.
relatively calm way. I think people recognize that it's an isolated and, perhaps a little bit embarrassing thing to have happened in our industry, but hopefully one will learn from and have tighter controls to prevent going forwards. But we'll find out what the gossip is and what the chat is very soon at another big industry conference. I'll be seeing many of you at Baden-Baden later in October. And Jared, you're not staying away from the scene either. You're
I'm excited to get back into the network. So I'll be out at the end of October in Singapore at Cirque. So if you're going to Baden-Baden, jump and grab Ben, say hi. If you're coming out to Singapore to Cirque, that's me. Come say hi to me. Would love to have a conversation and catch up with you both on all things reinsurance podcasting and all things reinsurance technology. So looking forward to seeing you all there. And until next time, have a great day, everyone.
see you in October.